All right, so we left off a couple weeks ago on Columbo number 3. So we've spent the past few eons learning Columbo number 1 and Columbo number 2. So we finally made it, everyone. We're on Columbo number 3. And what's nice about Columbo number 3 is that's the last one. So this is actually going to complete the circuit of using questions to make a point, right? So what's kind of cool about Columbo number 1 and Columbo number 2, right? They're kind of information gathering type of questions. So let's just do a quick rehash. Who remembers what Columbo number 1 is? Don't be shy.
What makes you say that?
Close.
Why do you think that?
That's more of a Columbo number 2. So Columbo number 1 is, because there is like a fine distinction between the two of them. They are very confusing. They can be confusing sometimes because they both sound the same. First one is pure information gathering. So it's just, what do you mean by that, right? So you're just trying to understand their view, right? What do you think? What is your concept of religion or of Christianity or of morality or whatever? You're trying to just understand their view. And then the Columbo number, does anyone remember so since we got what do you mean by that out of the way, does anyone remember what Columbo number 2 is? That's okay if you don't.
How would you come to that?
Yes. So how'd you come to that conclusion? So and the way that's props, Brian. So what that one's doing is you're now taking. So now that we know what their view is, we want to know how they came to have that view, right? What's their rationale for coming to that conclusion that this is a true thing, whatever they think. And what you're doing. So that number 1 is telling us that the first two questions require no knowledge, right? And this is the beauty of tactics, of the Columbo tactic, is that the first two steps don't require you to know anything. You can just hit the ground running as soon as you know to ask those two questions when you're challenged in some way. The one that I've been using for the past few weeks is, you're confronted and they say, Christians are just a bunch of science deniers, right? And then you want to ask them the question, what do you mean by science denier, right? What do you mean by science? What do you mean by that I deny science, right? That would be your use of Columbo number 1. And then when they say, because you don't believe in evolution, and then you can start to ask questions, how'd you come to the conclusion that evolution is a scientific fact or something like that, right? So you want to try to get their rationale. And what's cool is that you can actually use questions to come full circle and actually make your case. Right, so because with the first two questions, you're not really making your case yet, even though somewhat passively you can, just by showing they don't really have a good rationale. Sometimes that's enough for them to kind of realize, I don't really have much of a case here. But you can actually come full cycle by using questions, so to show that whatever their view is does not match up with reality, and you can use a question to kind of juxtapose those two against each other, so that there's a bit of a contradiction there, and try to see if they can grapple with that contradiction, which it's going to be tough for them. And so what's nice about that, does anyone remember why asking questions is so beneficial in these kinds of discussions? On them. Right. And so you can imagine if you can make your entire case without ever having to make a statement, you never bear the burden of proof, ever. So it's pretty useful once you can. Now it does take some retraining to try to not make assertions because it's just something that we naturally do when we feel like we're challenged. But if we can kind of get good at that, it's a very useful skill. So we want to enlist the help of the other person to make our point, right? So that's part of it, right? So we're using this information. So number 4 there, we want to pay close attention to what the information that we've gotten from Columbo number 2 and Columbo number 1, all that information that we've gathered from the previous questions, so that we now know what their view is, we know what their rationale is, and then we start to think about how does this match with reality. Right, and then we have a target in mind. So, for example, if you know that they're an atheist, right? Now, where does morality exist in atheism? How do you get moral thinking out of atheism? You can't, right? There's really, it's not grounded in anything. They can have preferences, like I'd prefer if you didn't kill me. I'd prefer if you didn't, take all my food away. I'd prefer if you didn't steal my car. But it's not really grounded in some more transcendent law that actually says that it's wrong, right? Because really the highest you can go with that is government, right? If there is no such thing as God, the highest authority that you could go to is a government, and of course governments change and their laws change. And so if you just say, okay, now we have a regime that says that it's perfectly fine to rape people, there's no recourse for that. They have to say, I guess they say it's okay, so we have to agree. But if you have a transcendent lawgiver, then it's bad for everyone or good for everyone, depending on how we're framing the morality. And so if you know that they're an atheist, well, a lot of atheists have some strong convictions about things, right? Racism is very wrong, or, it's very wrong for, to take away women's rights, or it's very wrong to kill people. They all have certain moral convictions. And so now you have a goal, so you can show how those two things do not match up. So you can say, well, what do you think of morality? Is it relative? Is it something that, that kind of just changes with the wind? Is it your truth and my truth? And you kind of start up that conversation to show that, like, well, do you actually believe in an objective morality? And then you can kind of drop the line, okay, well, if really morality is all relative, then I guess, if I'm a racist, that's not really a bad thing, right? Because it's just my view versus your view. And so you can't say, racism is objectively wrong. And so it kind of you're kind of using a question to make a point that if you're a moral relativist, racism cannot be objectively wrong. And so why are you even correcting me for being a racist at that point, right? So, you're using all that information that you gathered from Columbo number 2, establishing that they're a moral relativist, and also establishing that they believe that racism is wrong, and then finally in Columbo number 3, you put them together and ask it in question form. So, and you want to address any inconsistency with a question, not a statement. So, so now we're going to have a little bit of fun and go over some challenges. And we're going to try to see if we can find the flaw in the thinking and see if we can come up with a good Columbo number 3. Now, we can take two different approaches to this. We can take a formal approach, right, where we just kind of, what would be a good Columbo number 1 for this question? And then we kind of move through and say, what's a good Columbo number 2? And then finally, at the end, we can come up with a Columbo number 3. Some of them you can actually skip steps and just ask kind of a clever question, and you can kind of just catch them, flat-footed in their tracks. But let's just see what we come up with. So, you shouldn't push your morality upon me. What's the flaw in that? Can anyone kind of identify it?
Are you pushing your morality?
That is kind of the crux of it. Now, if you were to ask, let's just kind of take a more formal approach. What word might you want to know more about in that? Pushing. What's that?
I was going to say your.
Take that further. I didn't think of that one.
Because your means I have morality, she has morality, you have morality. Like,
right.
Then it kind of goes back to
whose morality.
If we all have, if it's my morality, I can be very moral.
Right.
I get to decide what's moral.
Right. Okay. So that's an interesting direction. That's not the one that I thought about. And then Caitlin, you said push, right? So that would be another one, right? Where you could kind of tease that out. So, what do you mean by pushing? And then have them describe that. And then they might say, well, you're just kind of forcing I don't believe what you believe, but you're pushing it upon me. And you kind of, after so long, you're just going to realize that you're disagreeing with them. That's all you're doing. You're not imposing your morality upon them in any kind of forceful way. And then you can simply ask, well, how is simple disagreement me pushing my morality upon you? And then, like Ryan said, aren't you just doing that by disagreeing with me, right? So how do we get to that point? Now, what's actually interesting about this statement is that it is completely incoherent. It actually is. We're going to learn about this. I don't know about next week, but the next session that I have, we're going to talk about something called the suicide tactic, and this is a suicide statement. The statement cannot meet its own requirements. It is self-refuting because it's making it's a moral claim that says that you can't make moral claims, right? Because shouldn't, right? You're saying that you shouldn't do something. That's a moral claim. It's wrong to do this, but you're saying it's wrong to push morality, and so it's saying that it's wrong to essentially do moral things, and therefore it just kind of cuts the legs out from under its feet. It's immoral to push your morality upon me, so they're doing a moral motion in that moment. And so you can kind of just note that the way they do it in the book is that they just have you say, well, why not? And then they're going to have to, in that, when you ask why not, they're going to then make a moral assertion, right? Because they're going to say, well, it's wrong to do this because of X, Y, and Z, and then they're going to be pushing their morality upon you. So that's kind of, they're very clever little tactics, and they're fun, and hopefully I can get good at enough to actually think of them on the spot. But that's why it's good to practice them here. So you're intolerant and arrogant. What might we want to know more about there?
I was like kind of jumping immediately to number two. Like, what made you think I'm intolerant?
Okay. Yeah.
I guess
So.
that's like a little jumping ahead.
No.
That's
It's.
gonna be my first like thought of that.
Yeah. No. That's good. So. Yeah. How'd you come to the conclusion that I'm intolerant? You can do that, right? But of course, that's still assuming that we know what they mean by what. Intolerant, right? So we want to we want to maybe take a little bit more of a formal approach, ask them what they mean by intolerance, right? And then from there you can ask, well, how'd you come to the conclusion that I'm intolerant? And then keep going. So now I'll just play this out a little bit. So let's just say, okay, you're intolerant and arrogant, and then you ask, well, what do you mean by intolerant? And they say, well, you're kind of just narrow-minded. You think everyone has to agree with you, right? And from there, you can just say, well, do you think your view is correct?
I think you should hold up a mirror at that point.
So, right. That's pretty much what this comes down to. Yes. Right. Right. So yeah, you could just do what Carolyn said, and I don't really carry. Yeah, I don't really carry mirrors around with me everywhere.
I don't yet, but maybe.
As our world becomes more hostile. That's good. Yeah, so you can just ask them if they think their view is correct, and then they're almost certainly going to say yes. They would have to, because if they didn't think their view was correct, then why would they be correcting you? Yeah, so that kind of is how that would typically go. Any other thoughts on maybe how to go about this one?
I find it's best just to always be right.
What's that?
I find it's best just to always be right.
That's right.
It's so fun being married.
That's yes.
Carolyn says you're intolerant. Any other comments?
That's right.
That's what you do with your kid trying to dig at you and start a fight. You just sort of agree.
Yeah,
And that way it's sort of,
I am stubborn. You're right.
It's-
That's the way it's gonna be.
Right. I guess that takes the wind out of their sails pretty quickly if you just agree with them. So that is certainly a tack that you can take.
I can be, but what makes you say this time?
My thought was that when I was saying the word Christian, me going, no, that's this. Sorry.
No, yeah, I think that's true, right? If someone says that you're pushing your morality upon them, that really does kind of insinuate that you're actually forcing them to believe something, right? Like they're like you're imposing it on them by law, or you're going to hurt them or something if they don't, which is nothing of the sort, right? And then kind of like a clever little question statement that you can make is like, well, why is it that when I make a statement, and how am I labeled as intolerant? But when you think that your view is correct, you're just correct, right? You're not labeled as intolerant. You're just kind of correct.
That's the longer version of what I meant, Mike.
I agree. So, all right, the miracles of the Bible prove it's a myth. So this one has some layers to it, but let's see if we can kind of tease this one out. Where do you think you want to go with this one?
I want to go with prove. I want to ask questions about
About prove, okay. So let's play that out a little bit. So what do you mean by prove? What do you think they would say to that?
miracles don't happen.
Right. So that's really, I think, the heart of what we're getting at now. Would you maybe want to? What do you think they mean by miracles when they say that?
Are they acknowledging miracles happen?
No. Yeah, I think that. So they're saying that the miracles are what prove that it's a myth. So was that your question?
Yeah, are they saying, let's say Jesus turned water into wine?
Right.
Are they denying that the water turned into wine, or are they saying that in this story it's just a story and water really did turn into wine in the story?
Right. Yeah. So I think the myth is that it turned into wine, but in reality, I think from their perspective, it didn't actually happen.
They're saying that it's just the event didn't occur.
What's that?
They would maybe say the event didn't occur at all.
Right. I'm pretty sure that's what they're going.
I think
What
I
they're
would
at.
ask the question too of I don't quite know what I'd say, but like, are you denying the fact that miracles never happen?
That's, yeah, right.
Surprising, coincidental things never happen.
So yeah, that would be a good question. And then let's just, hey, I'll be the atheist. Okay. So you're what's your question?
My question is, are you denying any miracles across history or something like that?
Well, yeah, they're impossible. Like natural law shows that they're impossible.
Right? But couldn't you go, okay, I have to think of this platform. Something like, see, I would argue that natural law in and of itself is a miracle because somebody had to put the natural law into place.
Right.
I don't know how to make that a question now.
So that's, yeah. So what they're, I think what they're saying. So yeah, if I'm saying that natural law shows that it's what you're driving at is right, because why is it that would they be fixed? Then would the laws be fixed if there's someone who's still above natural law?
Right, but like I would simply say, I think I would go. I don't know if I want to go that big because that's like a huge kind of question. But like I think going more along the lines of like you've never experienced something that was beyond coincidence in your life.
That's yeah, you could go that direction, right? Of
I
like,
think that brings it to a little more of a non-super philosophical conversation.
yeah. So I guess depending on who you're talking to, right? If you're talking to someone that might respond better to more personal.
In an academic situation, I think we could take the natural law and talk about natural order and how that was put into place. But if I'm having a conversation with Ryan, as a friend of mine, I don't think I'm going to go that route.
Okay, yeah, so you might have like certain people in mind that just wouldn't respond well to that kind of discussion, or it's just going to be like.
I feel like it just goes too high too quick and then kind of miss
The point.
the heart of the conversation.
Yeah, and that's something that we have to keep in mind in any of these discussions. We have to know who our audience is, right? So if we know it's something that if we start talking about Socrates or Aristotle, it's just going to be like way too high and philosophical, then we don't go that direction. We kind of have to tailor our conversations to who we're talking to.
In that case, if you're having a conversation with someone that you want to have a stare and just walk away. You're trying to prove a point to get somebody to actually ask questions. To your point, I think you can't make that leap too soon.
Right, and ultimately, like we're not looking to. I'm not going to convert anybody on this statement, but it's like that gardening thing we're talking about from the very beginning. Like if it's nothing more than being like a head, like if it's a head scratcher, then that's a win.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, yeah, pebble in your shoe. So, all right. So that's one direction we can take.
Them claiming it's a miracle, is that because they don't understand how it happened? Like, do they have an explanation for how the miracle happened? Because I remember someone named Mike who was performing a bunch of tricks. we might not know how some of that stuff happens.
Right.
Like, is that a miracle? Is it, or if I know like you, or Mike rearrange
Right. Yeah, say it right.
Did we ever tell you what I put that night in my calendar?
Oh no, I have a feeling I know. Yeah. I have people. I have people from this church that don't know what that movie is. That like, oh, it's Magic Mike. I'm like, no, it's not. No, it's not. It's really funny. Yeah, thank you.
You would draw a different crowd.
That's for sure. At a church.
That's
That's certainly one way to evangelize.
maybe you start asking these questions.
That's right. Right.
Or maybe you should put that on the street, and then you get lots of that.
I'm sure Katie's a huge fan of these ideas. Yeah.
Katie also go for it.
All right, so that was a good direction, right? Try to figure out, what's their concept of miracle, right? And I think that's like a good first step. Like, what do you mean by miracle, right?
I think, John, too, like, simply not understanding how something works. Like, but I think that's a really neat conversation starter because there's a lot of things that we can't understand how they work, like fax machines. I don't understand how they work.
Yeah, right.
They're not a miracle.
But you think like someone like 150 years ago, that would be a miracle to them, like a fax machine or watching something like that. It would look like one. And of course, just like when we bring God into the picture, it changes everything, right? Because God can cause miracles because He is above all of that, right? It's only when we don't believe in God, when we say God is an impossibility, that we then have to assume that miracles are impossible because God He's the one who created the natural law. And so what just for argument's sake, let's just say they take this in the direction of saying, well, yeah, miracles are impossible because supernatural things don't happen, right? They just don't happen. Those are impossible. And then you can ask, well, why would you say that supernatural things are impossible? How did you come to that conclusion that you can't have a supernatural event? And to that, it might just be like a rephrasing of that natural law thing. Like, well, science has disproven that miracles happen. Right? We have science now. They didn't have science in the time of Jesus and the apostles and all that, and so they just assumed that miracles could happen back then. And you can just gently press. Well, this is where it kind of is a little bit of a mental flip. What does science do? Asks questions, but primarily about what?
Whose theories about why things happen?
Nature. Things we don't understand, right? Does science have access to the supernatural? Right, they measure natural events. Right, it's a material enterprise.
So you're testing a testable hypothesis. It has to be grounded in fact.
Fact, right, and
or observable conditions.
right, and generally of material phenomena. Right, that's there is a separate discipline, something like logic, right, which deals more with making sure that contradictions aren't happening. This is more of a theoretical thing. But generally, what science is doing is it's measuring natural phenomena. And this is kind of a mind bender, but what you're going to say there is, how can something that really only measures natural phenomena disprove something supernatural? Right? Disprove something that... Right? So, and that's kind of where that goes. I didn't think of this. This was in the book. But that's why I'm saying there's a couple layers to that, right? You want to get an understanding of what they think miracles are and why they think miracles are impossible. And they likely are assuming at the beginning that God doesn't exist, right? Because that's another way you can ask that. Has science disproven God? Of course, science has no way to disprove God because God is beyond science. And so they're assuming that God doesn't exist in order to say that miracles prove that it's a myth. Because if God exists, miracles are possible, just de facto. This is my favorite one. Jesus was a good man, but he wasn't God or the only Savior. What about that one?
Tell me more about a good man.
Yes! Thank you. All right.
The guy that flipped over the tables at the temple.
That's right, that guy. So now, why do you? All right, so I'll be the atheist again. All right, good man. They just generally do moral things. Like Jesus kind of told us to love others and to treat your neighbor as yourself and all that stuff. So that's kind of what a good man is.
And Jesus also said that he was the Son of God, like God's Son, like part of God. He also said that.
Oh, okay. So what's your question?
I don't know.
Yes, your line of reasoning is spot on. right? The direction that you're taking this is exactly.
You also know that Jesus said he was the Son of God, and he claimed to be God, and he claimed to be the Savior of the world. Did you know that?
Yes. That's right. That's the end. Yeah. Good. Now, another way that you could do that too is so after they define what a good man is, right? It's just a moral person who loves everyone or whatever. Then you could say, well, would you characterize pathological liars as good men? Right? And then you'd say, well, okay, so assuming that Jesus wasn't God or the only Savior, he made those claims, that was a frequent event. So that would make him a pathological liar. So I guess could Jesus still be a good man? Because he seems to be lying all over the place in the New Testament. So that's that kind of, that's where you could go with that. But what you said was exactly right. It's just another way of phrasing that. So thank you, Brian. All right. A fetus may be a human being, but it's not a person. So what direction would we want to... Now, there's a formal approach that we can take with this one, or there is a kind of a quick, concise way to kind of dismantle this one.
What do you mean by a person?
Yes, right. So, and you could take both, right? You can have them. Well, what do you mean by human? What do you mean by person? Right? And they can give you like a list for like both of them or whatever. Then where do you want to go with it?
What do you feel is the difference between? I guess they're defining it.
Well, that's actually how it was written in the book. Was what's the difference, right? But it's essentially achieving the same end, right? As saying, what do you mean by both? Okay, so now let's say that they've told you the difference between a human being and a person. Then what?
Well, I guess it depends on what their answer is.
What's their answer? Atheist, Mike.
What's that?
What's their answer?
Yeah.
All right. Well, a human being, it's like, the zygote and all the DNA and, the fleshy stuff, the organs, like all the biological matter that comes with being alive. And then you have the person, which is like the hopes and dreams of the person and the self-awareness and their level of knowledge. Right.
I'm telling you, toddlers are not people.
There we go.
So what do you think about anyone under the age of 2?
Right. Yes, exactly.
Not self-aware, that runs into tables.
What do you think about
Right. That's perfect. Right. So you're showing them that it's an absurd thought to try to tease out the difference between person and human being. This is like, I think this is just fun for us to kind of go through it ourselves because it gets us thinking. The way that the book took a slightly different tack with this one. It said, okay, well, what's the difference, right? And after they list their differences, it doesn't even like hypothesize what those differences might have been. It just says, okay, well, who makes the list? And then you start to notice that it's just people making arbitrary lists, defining that this person as human, this person's human, this person's not human, blah blah blah, and then you simply ask, well, isn't that what like kind of the Nazis did? And, like slave owners, they just kind of made these arbitrary differences, and like, well, this person's not valuable because they're a Jew, this person's not valuable because they have black skin, and you can kind of take it that direction. But the crux of it, what you guys said was right? You kind of ask kind of a pointed question. Well, okay. So by your qualifications, a 3-month-old is not a human being or is not a person. Yeah.
Yeah, so do you get to decide who lives that? Because then you can sort of bring in like a Nazi.
Right.
Because that's really what they were doing. So it's like, so are you deciding who
Because
lives?
they're not a person.
What was that?
But there would be them because they're not a person.
That's true. All right, so last one. So how can God exist when there's so much evil in the world? This is a popular one that people bring up. I think we've talked about it a couple times between the two classes. But how do you think you want to go about breaking this one down?
What do you mean by evil?
Yep, that would probably be a good place to start, right? So that's a good Columbo number 1. I'll be the atheist. Just bad things.
What makes you that?
Well, rape, torture, murder, those kind of things.
So your definition is the absence of good.
Yes.
And where's the definition of good come from?
Well, it's just, they're good things. It's, it's not, not hurting people and stuff like that.
So the evil exists because the good doesn't?
I guess so.
Right. So, and if the God is the goodness, then the evil doesn't prove his non-existence. It's just his absence from the people.
That's pretty much it. That's the line of reasoning that you want to go with that, right? You want to show that the existence of evil is dependent on God, right? That evil can't exist unless God exists, because God establishes what is good and evil, right? That was really good. I was trying to be a good atheist.
I was like, I don't know, it's in there, you gotta get it out.
Yep. Yeah. So and they could come up with like things like where you could say when I was like playing this out of my head during the week, well, rape, torture, murder, all those things are bad, and you could say, well, okay, well, why are they bad? And they'll say, well, because they hurt people. And you can say, well, why is hurting people bad? And then eventually it just kind of funnels them down into like, how can they possibly explain why hurting people is bad if they don't actually have a solid reason for that? There's no law that they can appeal to that hurting people is wrong, and there have been regimes that have hurt people and said it was a good thing in the past, and what kind of recourse can you take against that if they are the top authority, right? So you show that evil really, like Carolyn pointed out, evil can't exist unless God's there to establish that evil is wrong. Okay, so requesting clarification. So, all right, so we want to begin by asking, can you clear this up for me, right? This is just being a good Columbo tactician, right? This is kind of what, we're all probably too young to have watched Columbo, at least when it was actually on. We might have seen reruns, but this is something that he would do, right? He would kind of look around, he got like messy hair and just kind of looking around, and he would just say, can you clear this up for me? And he'd look really disheveled, and the person, it was really disarming, right? The other person was just like, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. And so they have no problem answering his questions, right? And so he'd always preface it by asking, I'm really confused by this. And this kind of makes us, it's kind of humble, where it's inviting, right? We want them to, engage them in conversation. And so they tend to not have a problem answering our questions until we actually ask the question, right? Which is, so here's some examples of how we might phrase certain things. So if the Bible were merely written by men, how could it contain fulfilled prophecies, right? How do you explain that, right? And this is doing a couple things, because maybe there's someone who's like read the Bible and is like looked at the prophecies and have come up with their rationale as to how they probably could have been put in there. Of course, that really does go against the historicity of the Bible and the like textual criticism and those that have really established that these books when they were chronologically written. But they might have some idea that, well, maybe the Gospels were written, before Psalm 22, and that's why it looks like Psalm 22 predicts the Gospels. But of course, we know that the Gospels were written way after Psalm 22, and we actually have some copies of Psalm 22 that definitively predate the Gospels. But they might not know that, and so you're trying to see what do you know about the reliability of the Bible and and prophecies and all that. And you're just seeing if they can actually come up with some explanation of that to, give you further, questions that you can ask. Can you help me understand this? If homosexuality is truly natural, then why did nature give homosexuals bodies designed to reproduce with the opposite sex? Of course, this is a common, thing that we'll hear is that, that it's perfectly natural for, homosexuality is perfectly natural. Of course, even if we're going by evolutionary biology, that doesn't really make much sense because it doesn't work, right? You cannot do the end goal of evolution, which is to pass your genes on to the next generation. And obviously the plumbing of it just doesn't work out. So I mean, you're showing that it's actually unnatural by natural design and natural law. So you're kind of flipping that. Now, they might say that, well, the desire itself is natural, and of course you can go, well, what do you mean by natural desires? We all have all sorts of desires that we don't want to pursue, and if we do, it just leads to total anarchy and destruction and complete lack of civilization. So, what's that? No big deal. We don't need civilization. Yeah, right, yeah. So that's kind of where you can go with that. And of course, always preface these kinds of conversations, because I think it's very easy for Christians to put themselves in a spot where they just look hateful, right? And so to take that out is like, I'm not I don't hate gay people when I'm talking about this. This is not, it's just a behavior that I'm making a commentary on that we're trying to decide, is this a moral thing to do, right? Is pedophilia a moral thing to do? I think most of us would still be of the position that it's wrong to treat children that way. But some people have that desire. And so why are we saying that this desire is not okay, but this one is, and they're both equally unnatural, really? And so you can kind of ask those kinds of questions if they start to say that the desire is a natural, even though the body itself is not designed in such a way to allow for that to be fruitful or whatever. So, can you help me understand this? If there is no evidence for abiogenesis, how can we say the theory of evolution is a fact? Anyone remember kind of?
What do you mean by abiogenesis?
Now is that you're like asking me that?
That's a for real question.
Okay, that's a for real question. Okay. So we brought this up. So there's a couple things with the theory of evolution that are big questions that scientists do not have answers to. Right. One is the Cambrian explosion. Anyone remember what that is? So that's.
It wasn't like almost like 90% of like all like animals, like all the fossils are all from the same time, of all different kinds. Where if we were thinking macroevolution, it would be more spread out. Like you wouldn't see it all at once.
Yeah, it's too fast.
Yeah, that like lends itself to creation.
The bottom fossil layers are all complicated, complex structures.
Right. Yeah, it's something like a 40 million year period, if we're going by like, old Earth creation, that all of this happened, which is by their own standard too fast for the level of complexity to develop. And so there is no explanation for that. The other one is abiogenesis. Abiogenesis is life coming from non-life, right? Because they're very good. They're very good at explaining how once life came to be, that it progressed into all these different varied forms and whatever, with mutations and such. But they have no explanation for how the life got there to begin with, right? So and they will agree that life was not there from the beginning. Right? They would say that the Earth came into existence approximately 4.5 billion years ago, and life started about 3.5 billion years ago. So, okay, what happened during those billion years? Like, how did that happen? In between 4.5 and 3.5 billion years ago. And their theory is that, under certain conditions, that you can have life generating from non-life. There is zero evidence for this anywhere. In fact, this is actually what's that? Ever.
Never does that happen.
No.
Was this a miracle?
There you go. This is a miracle. Thank you. That's right. That's a good question.
Let's talk back to that miracle.
Yeah, actually, it harkens back to things that people used to believe back in like the Middle Ages. When they would see meat rotting, they would assume that like spontaneous generation was a thing. That the flies that kind of came out of that just were generated not by anything. It was just like kind of a miraculous. It was life coming from non-life.
That the flies were created by the rotting.
By the rotting meat, correct. Same thing with like germs. Before we understood germs, and bacteria would just start growing on things. They would just assume that it was.
That's why the rats got blamed for the plague.
Yeah, actually, that was the other one. Yeah, when rats would kind of just suddenly materialize, or mice would just suddenly materialize near, rotting flesh. The same sort of thing. There was this belief that spontaneous generation was real, and actually, there's some vestiges of that in our own scientific culture today with the belief in abiogenesis, right? And so, but there's absolutely no evidence for it. It's just that they have no explanation, and so that is the only explanation that they can come up with, right?
I
So.
learned this week that the kids and I are talking about evolution stuff.
Okay.
first.
Yeah.
And we were watching this video, and it's a little, the acting is a little silly. But the boys think it's very funny, but the information in it is really good. And they were talking about Charles Darwin's book, The Origin of Species.
Right.
And even within his own book, he notably says there are holes in this
Yes.
theory. I hope you guys can figure it out in years to come.
Right.
And now here we are, however many years later, nowhere closer.
Nothing.
But
Yeah.
I guess that's just something I didn't know before. Because you always think, you think of the theory of evolution, it's connected to Charles Darwin. You just kind of assume it's a full and complete theory, a complete theory at that point. But even Darwin acknowledged at the time of writing this great idea down,
Right.
that there were massive holes
in that. Yeah. No, it's true.
And I was like, huh.
Yeah, like the way the scientific community like
The
makes
way-
it like this is a fact, and you would never think that he had written that
You
because of
wouldn't,
the way
you
that
wouldn't,
happened.
like that would be something that I would love to be like, hey, have you read his Origin of Species? Because he acknowledges that there's holes in this theory.
Right.
I think they
Like,
talk
have-
about
have we
the
solved those
project
holes?
that they're watching in Gary and Robert's Lost True Project talks about that, because that was the first time I ever knew that. When I watched that video series, he talks about how like Darwinism was disproved long ago, and they just continue to push it.
Yeah.
It's
There's.
a really good video series. It's a little above. Dan's close to being there. Jake loves it. It zooms over with this.
Well.
What's the name of the video series?
It's on Right Now Media, and it's called Debunking Evolution.
It's funny because we were just talking, Evan and I were just talking about evolution.
But they said in the beginning of it that you can access it online too. So type in Debunking Evolution, I'm sure it'll come up. I mean, it's two teenagers talking back and forth. The acting is cheesy. but like the kids are like Jake's young enough to think that it's funny. Like he doesn't realize it's cheesy. So like he just thinks it's funny. Like that they're being silly back and forth. But the information's really
Yeah, because I got on the bus the other day and told the girl, the safety patrol, that he wasn't listening to her anymore because she believed in evolution.
all right, buddy.
So I'm like, okay, but he didn't have any facts behind, you know.
Yeah, right.
He needed something to back it up.
conversation. He had nothing to back it up.
Well, and this is broken up into little like 10-minute segments, so like you can watch 2 or 3 of them and come back to it or
So that's nice.
whatever. So
Yeah, but that's a good point, though. That I think the whole theory of the origin of it was one that was a big question that he had no explanation to. I think he had some idea that under the right condition, if it was like a warm pool of some kind, that and the matter was just
Sludge was just right.
pretty much, like
How did
I
they create that sludge?
right.
The sludge came from outer space.
Well, there are those.
I mean, we're all aliens.
yeah, I just thought that was just really interesting to me to hear that. Like I don't know. I guess I just always assumed that Darwin had a complete theory, but actually the man that we give all the credit to had no idea how any of his ideas worked.
Yeah, and they haven't actually answered them either. Like it's not like over time they filled in those gaps.
We're not filling in the holes.
Yeah. So, but they present it. I mean, how many times have you heard in the culture, like in TV shows or whatever? Oh, science, evolution's a fact. You're like a barbarian if you don't believe in evolution.
The other thing that I thought was
Yeah.
really interesting. I thought this was fantastic. So there's the idea that obviously we know we evolved from apes,
Right.
and so we have skeletal fossils of apes, and we have skeletons of humans, and we lack a lot in the middle. We lack everything in the middle. But they were talking about how it was like in the early mid-1900s, the first ape-man skeleton was found in the United States, and there's this huge deal throughout the United States news, throughout Europe, later to be like in the microprint, later to be discovered that they created this entire theory of this ape-man found in the United States based on a tooth that they found.
So, yeah.
And the pictures that are in the textbooks are still drawings dating back to the time that was in the news.
Wow. Yeah, that's. I mean, it's
And
just
the
such.
best part is it's a pig tooth. It's not even a monkey.
Right. Wow. So.
Anyway, that was fascinating. But like that's like the pictures that were drawn in the newspapers to like show the I don't know what to call it, 8-person, the transition. Like those are the pictures that are still being used to prove evolution, based on the drawings that were created from Big Tooth.
Yeah, that's. I know it's fascinating when you go into this stuff and you actually look at the history of evolution. And I'm actually ignorant to some of these details. Like I didn't know about that.
I watched it this week.
Yeah,
so
that's-
like it's fresh.
Yeah.
And not going anywhere.
That's right.
I
Yeah.
found that information. But yeah, it was just really interesting.
There's another one that I know similar to your story, where they've had drawings of different animals, like during their fetal development. So whether they're in eggs or in the womb, I can't really remember. But they show how there's this commonality between each species in its various, pre-birth environment, and how they all look very, 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 very similar. And they use that to make a case for evolution, because like, look how they all start out the same, but then they just become more diverse as they age, right? And they try to say that because we all started out the same, it's almost like a reflection of evolution in a way. That's the case that they're trying to make. However, these were all drawings that they were using to make this case. And when you actually draw them, like if you actually study these various animals, pigs or fish or whatever, as they're developing, they look completely different. They don't even look like close. Yeah.
Ding, ding, ding. Like,
So-
we're not looking at photographic evidence.
Right. So it's so often that I'll read something about something like intelligent design, and like if you ever go on Wikipedia, if you ever read about something intelligent design in Wikipedia, it's always preceded by pseudoscience. It's always called pseudoscience. Every time that they refer to this pseudoscience, discipline called intelligent design. And yet they'll look at something like evolution, where it has these major gaps, and even like almost fraudulent sometimes with the pig tooth or with those drawings, where I would call that pseudoscience. That's not. That's
You're not really doing it if you're just looking at drawings.
right. So
People that are saying like, why do you believe the Bible? Because there are miracles in it, but yet they're looking at a drawing of it.
And don't question.
Right.
And they're believing in miracles just the same. They're just different ones.
right.
Like everything came from this ooze. I mean, whatever you want to call it. Like, how does that happen? Show me one place that's ever happened ever in preceding times.
Right. And what is the difference between that and a miracle? I think that's like a good question, like kind of Jonathan said. So, all right. Well, I guess we're. What's that?
I did find it right now.
Okay, yeah. Oh, then if you have that, then
Yes.
appreciate it.
Well, I think this was great discussion, everybody. So, thanks for coming. I'll pray our way out of here, and then we can head to worship. So thank you, Lord, for bringing us into your house and just allowing us to just ask some of these questions, right, about some of these challenges that are brought towards our way, and just try to think through them a little bit, see where those logical fallacies are, so that when we come across them, in real life, that we can gently and respectfully just challenge them and just be good witnesses for you. Hence, in Jesus' name we pray, amen.